Every morning at 7, Margaret opened her small cafe on Hartley Street. She was 42, practical and kind, the sort of woman who remembered how customers took their tea. The neighborhood had changed over the years. The butcher shop closed. The bookstore became a mobile phone repair shop. But Margaret's cafe remained warm and constant. One rainy Tuesday, an old man shuffled through the door. He must have been 75, maybe older. His gray beard was unkempt, his jacket worn thin at the elbows. He stood by the counter, counting coins in his weathered palm. "Just tea, please," he said quietly. His voice carried an accent she couldn't quite place. Margaret looked at the coins. Not enough. She smiled anyway. "The tea comes with toast this morning," she said. "Special offer." The old man's eyes met hers. He knew, but he nodded and found a table by the window. His name was Vincent. She learned this slowly, over weeks. He came every morning, always with exact change for tea, always receiving toast she claimed was part of a special. He never said much, but his eyes held stories, the kind written in wrinkles and long silences. "You remind me of my daughter," he said one morning. "She had your kindness." "Had?" Margaret asked gently. "Long ago," Vincent said, looking out at the rain. "Another life." Margaret had worked hard to keep the cafe running after her husband left. Some months the bills barely got paid. But she couldn't stop feeding Vincent. There was something about his loneliness that broke her heart in a familiar way. Winter came hard that year. Vincent's cough grew worse. Margaret started packing him sandwiches to take away, insisting they were leftovers that would spoil. "You are too good," Vincent would say. "Nonsense," Margaret replied. "Food shouldn't go to waste." One Thursday morning, Vincent didn't come. Margaret worried through the breakfast rush. By noon, she closed early and walked to the boarding house where he lived. The landlady directed her to a dim room upstairs. Vincent lay in bed, feverish and weak. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Hush now," Margaret said, feeling his burning forehead. "I'm calling a doctor." "No doctors. No hospitals. Please." Something in his voice stopped her. Fear old and deep. Instead, she brought soup, changed his bedding, sat with him through 3 days of fever. She didn't ask questions. Some people carried past too heavy for words. On the 4th day, Vincent's fever broke. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "You saved my life," he said. "You don't know what that means." "You're a good man who needed help," Margaret answered. "That's all that matters." The following Monday, Margaret returned to her cafe. Vincent appeared at noon, looking stronger. Behind him, a black car idled on the street, expensive and conspicuous on their humble road. Vincent sat at his usual table. Margaret brought tea and toast without asking. The cafe door opened. A man entered, mid-30s, sharp-suited, moving with the kind of confidence that fills a room. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression unreadable. For more men followed, standing by the door like sentries. The few customers grew quiet. Margaret felt her pulse quicken. The suited man walked straight to Vincent's table. His shoes clicked on the worn linoleum. Everyone watched. Then he dropped to one knee. "Father," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been searching for 2 years." Margaret froze, her hand still holding the teapot. Vincent's weathered face crumpled. "Marco," he whispered. "My son." Marco gripped his father's hands. "Why did you leave? Why did you disappear?" "Because I was tired," Vincent said quietly. "Tired of that life. The violence. The fear. I wanted peace. I wanted to be just a man again, not what I had become." Marco's jaw tightened. "You're the head of our family. We needed you." "You needed a ghost," Vincent replied. "I couldn't be that man anymore." Margaret stood very still, understanding dawning cold and clear. Vincent wasn't just an old man. He had been someone powerful, someone dangerous. Perhaps. Marco noticed her for the first time. His eyes were hard, assessing. "This is Margaret," Vincent said, standing slowly. "She fed me when I was hungry. She cared for me when I was sick. She asked nothing in return." Marco studied her. "You knew who he was?" I knew he was hungry, Margaret said, finding her voice. That's all I needed to know. Something shifted in Marco's expression. He reached into his jacket. Margaret's heart hammered, but he pulled out a thick envelope. For the cafe, Marco said, placing it on the counter, and for your kindness to my father. I don't want money, Margaret said firmly. I did what anyone should do. But most don't, Marco replied. In my world, kindness is rare. You gave it freely. Vincent moved to stand beside Margaret. She has a good heart. This place matters to people. Let your thanks be sincere, not insulting. Marco nodded slowly. He spoke to his men in Italian, too quick for Margaret to follow. They left, the black car pulling away. Marco turned back. My father wishes to stay here. I respect that, but we'll make sure you're both protected. Comfortable. I don't need protection, Margaret started. This neighborhood does, Marco said. The landlord's raising rents. The developer's circling. These things can be managed. Vincent touched Margaret's arm. Let him do this. In his world, debts must be honored. You gave me my humanity back. Let my son give you security. Over the following months, things changed quietly. Hartley Street stopped deteriorating. The rent Margaret paid stayed reasonable. The cafe thrived without explanation, except that more people seemed to discover it. Vincent came every morning. Sometimes Marco joined him, sitting awkwardly at first, slowly learning to just be a son, having tea with his father. One spring morning, as Margaret poured their tea, Marco said, He talks about you constantly, about simple kindness. I'm teaching my children about you. Margaret smiled. I'm nobody special. That's where you're wrong, Vincent said gently. You saw a hungry old man, not his past, not his sins, just someone who needed care. That's rare enough to be remarkable. Years passed differently when you found purpose. Margaret's cafe became a neighborhood anchor. Vincent lived out his days in peace, feeding pigeons in the park, playing chess with other old men. When he finally passed, quietly in his sleep at 81, the funeral was small. Just Margaret, Marco, and a handful of neighborhood people who'd known the gentle old man at the window table. Marco found Margaret afterward. He left you the boarding house, he said. Bought it years ago through my accounts. It's yours. He wanted you to always have a home. Margaret wept then, not for the gift, but for the depth of gratitude it represented. He told me something before he died, Marco said. He said you taught him that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing kindness in the present. Every small choice, every act of grace. Margaret touched the photo she'd framed from Vincent's memorial, him smiling at his cafe table, finally at peace. We save each other, she said softly. That's all we're meant to do. Marco nodded and left. The cafe remained. The neighborhood continued. And Margaret kept feeding whoever walked through her door, knowing that kindness, freely given, changes everything. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales.